Chemtrails are chemical trails. They were first named chemtrails by the U.S. Air Force Academy. This is not a tinfoil hat term. This is straight from the military. And they are aerosols, persistent contrails you can call them. Whatever you want to call them, they are loaded with barium, strontium, aluminum, other heavy metals that are highly conductive. They are loaded with polymers. Polymers like mylar are piggybacked with biological experiments, genetically engineered experiments, which is what Morgellons is. Clifford has renamed it the cross-domain bacteria. And they ride down on these chemicals and polymers, and then radio frequency hits these conductive metals. And this quickens them and activates them and multiplies the energy in them. And it is this that creates, on the one hand, the ionized atmosphere needed for what the military terms C4, command, control, communications, and cyber warfare. They want a battery-ready atmosphere for an electromagnetic weaponry that asymmetric warfare depends upon ever since the Revolution in Military Affairs, the RMA, that happened in the 1990s. So of course they're not going to talk about this. This is covert warfare. This is something that has not been announced. Slowly they are announcing things like the LRAD that can turn your organs to mush and make you bleed from all your orifices. These are so-called non-lethals. These chemtrails are a delivery system. HAARP, which has now been shut down in Gakona, Alaska, it's being retooled, revamped for other missions.
Is there any benefit in exploring a potential relationship with the University of Alaska to perhaps take over the HAARP?
Yeah, thank you, Senator. The Air Force has gotten great value out of HAARP in the past. We took over from the Navy and managed it and actually did a number of experiment campaigns up there and have finished our work that we're interested in doing up there. We've moving on to other ways of managing the ionosphere, which the HAARP was really designed to do, was to inject energy into the ionosphere, be able to actually control it.
Revamped for other missions. But now there are over 250 ionospheric heaters around the world, all the way from the NEXRADs to the SBXs offshore. There are many, many instruments that will really kill life on Earth, because even though thermal radiation, ionized radiation is what everybody thinks of, and we had Fukushima, and now everybody's worried about the Fukushima plume, we should also be worried about the non-ionized radiation that we are all now subject to, not just from our cell phones and the cell towers near our homes, and all the wireless going on, but the ionized atmosphere that we're breathing. And we're breathing in those heavy metals. Breathing in those polymers loaded with biologicals. We are the petri dish of a multitude of military experiments, and we have had no say in this. We're still accustomed to waiting for our authority figures to tell us the difference between what is true and not true. I don't have a PhD in plasma physics, and there is no peer review of my work. My work is a referenced work for the citizenry. It is not necessarily for plasma physicists, because I grew tired of waiting for them to come forward and speak. It's absolutely silent from the science community, other than the Tower of Babel that has arisen in the corporate media. And I think it's entirely to confuse citizens. Is there climate change? Isn't there climate change? Then the next one was, well, there's global warming, but now we have extreme weather. And is there an ice age coming, or is this actual global warming, and we're going to melt the Arctic and the Antarctic? I mean, this is a very common technique of media control over the American mind. I think some people who have been deemed conspiracy theorists call it the Hegelian dialect. And it is. It's if you present the problem, and you can frame the problem, you can then frame the solution. It's been going on for over 50 years. Edward Bernays was the one who began it in the United States. All the PhDs who have worked to confuse the American mind through media, it's unbelievable. And the fact that our people are confused, I feel for them. Of course they're confused.
Climate change denial is threatening our planet, destroying our politics, and driving us crazy.
Americans support science, and we won't stand for climate denial anymore.
They expect that their authority figures will not lie, despite the fact that we have been lied to over and over and over. And it has always come out in the media eventually, usually after 50 years, which is quite a long time. I don't feel the need to defend against this conspiracy theorist tinfoil hat nonsense. It's usually from people who won't read the book. There's over 600 footnotes. I did the best I could to prove the case beyond the shadow of a doubt that we have a massive elephant in the living room that is consistently ignored in all the dialogue and all the arguments and debates on climate. Never once has the word military, not once has the word military, and the possibility that the military would use this technology, geoengineering or whatever you want to call it, not once has it been in one account in the corporate media. In Santa Fe, and we were friends for 5 years while both of us lived there. It is Clifford that led me to see that there was a connection between HAARP and chemtrails, and between chemtrails and the disease known as Morgellons. And he has done more than 15 years of research on a shoestring budget. He used to work for the Department of Defense, he's worked for the Bureau of Land Management, he's worked for Fish and Wildlife. He left those years ago when he realized that science had been politicized, and he wanted to do real science. Since then, he has been working on this issue on a shoestring budget because the CDC and the EPA ignore him. At the same time, over 160 alphabet agencies of the US government have hit his site on a weekly basis to see what he comes up with. So we have a real deception going on here. Go and see the hundreds of papers, scientific papers he has there to show that this is real, what is going on with the Morgellons and the chemtrails. He can analyze the hundreds of environmental specimens being sent to him by citizens around this country. As I listened to him lay out his discovery of the cross-domain bacteria, otherwise known as Morgellons, in the fibers dropping from the sky after particularly heavy spraying operations, my undergraduate biology background was resurrected. As he examined my saliva and blood, I peered through his microscope at genetically engineered critters, sucking the iron out of my red blood cells and distorting their round shape. The aerosols were not just distributing chemicals, they were delivering biological and genetically engineered organisms whose nanoscale size guaranteed that all living organisms were breathing and ingesting them. Warfare is no longer something taking place far away with big armies on the move. Now, thanks to the electromagnetic era that has crept up on us, the battle space is everywhere. And the line between combatant and non-combatant, that's us, has been erased.
How did you come to be so convinced, I guess is the question.
By the weight of evidence. I mean, how else does a good researcher become convinced of something? You have to do hundreds and thousands of hours of weighing various reports and papers and what is really being said here. And I've devoted my whole life to this. This is what I do, and I've done it. I did it with MK Ultra. I researched for 10 years on MK Ultra. And I've written articles for various magazines. Anything I take up, it has to do with my passion, because my passion is what drives my engine that gives me the discipline to keep going. And this just because of Clifford, actually, and my publisher, Adam Parfrey at Feral House Press. I already had a couple of files on HAARP and chemtrails. It's just that I didn't know yet how intricately they were bound together. And now this next book I've already begun will be the sequel, and this book is called The Space Fence. And this will be on what has come of Reagan's Strategic Defense Initiative, the Star Wars programs, and certainly HAARP and chemtrails are the next phase of that, SDI, and now the final phase, it will be the space fence. And so this will be a highly technical book that I will again try to make available to the common person, because we can't wait for the experts anymore. They're being threatened with death. They have to sign confidentiality agreements. They're scared to death to speak on this, and so it's up to us, the citizenry, to take it up and take it as far as we can. With the expansion of military battle space and the redefinition of warfare as asymmetric, with non-lethal electromagnetic weapons, it should come as no surprise that the military outlook on non-combatant populations should change as well. In this oft-quoted public law, we find the gaping loophole through which broad experimentation with chemical and biological agents on civilian populations has been driven. The place to pay attention to here, this is it. Any purpose that is directly related to protection against toxic chemicals or biological weapons and agents, these are the exceptions. Any peaceful purpose that is related to a medical, therapeutic, pharmaceutical, agricultural, industrial, or research activity. These are the exceptions to what is prohibited. HAARP, the High Frequency Active Auroral Research Program, was research. But was it for peaceful purposes? And chemtrails were part of it, despite the suffering of citizens, the breathing in of conductive metals and polymers, the soaring increase of respiratory ailments and asthma, the alkalinizing of the soil, the acidifying of the oceans, the endless obscuring of the sun. And yet the media catechism was that trails filled with chemicals, chemtrails, don't exist. We are looking at normal water condensation, contrails that just happen to last for hours, while transforming into what has now been consecrated with its own Latin name, Cirrus contralis. The military has lusted after weather control since long before the European wars. Indeed, weather has defeated many a battle strategy. Even the atomic bomb on July 16, 1945 at White Sands Missile Range had to be postponed several hours due to weather. From Project Storm Fury, also known as Project Cirrus, to Operation Popeye in Vietnam, the U.S. military has diligently pursued cloud seeding and chemical cauldrons in which to mix rain, wind, and drought for warfare purposes. Chapter 1 of Chemtrails, HAARP, and the Full Spectrum Dominance of Planet Earth surveys the extensive experiments that finally led up to the present covert chemtrails radio frequency programs that all NATO nations are suffering under. I have trouble talking with PhDs because I feel they've been conditioned in a certain way, and it takes a very strong individual to leave that conditioning behind in order to really examine the evidence.
Universities produce ideology and people, both of which are needed to maintain and degrade the status quo in society. University faculty are hired to produce the ideology and people. They call that work research and teaching. The corporations need ideology that treats their power as legitimate, and they need educated, obedient employees.
It takes a very strong individual to leave that conditioning behind in order to really examine the evidence.